Before discussing the Amnesty reports, I'd like to have a few words about the Abraham Accords with you.
Sure.
And in September 2020, Israel signed so-called Abraham Accords with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain at the White House under President Trump's watch. These agreements were the first peace or normalization agreements since the peace agreement with Jordan in 1994. And within a few months later, similar agreements were signed with Morocco and Sudan.
That's true.
So how difficult it was to reach these deals, as somebody said, and how important these treaties are for Israel and for the Middle East?
So I'll just say that we worked on that for a decade and even more. It's not something that happens not during 1 month or a year. I mean, really, we work behind the scene. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs and other authorities and the government institutions in Israel were working behind the scene and in some confidential routes. And eventually, we could come to these relations could come up to the light. And I think everyone who understands and know what's going on appreciate the importance of these agreements. I think they created a new reality in our region. And I'm not talking about only the political situation, and of course normalization with Arab states, it's tremendous, it's very important. It's not enough words to describe it. It's a continuation of our relations with Egypt and Jordan. Very important. But I'm talking about the people-to-people connection and about the tourism, investments, and just education connections between United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco. Very important, really.
In the media, the role of President Trump and his staff has been pretty remarkable. How was the role of the U.S. in this whole process?
As you mentioned, pretty remarkable. We must mention here that United States of America played a very important role. And sometimes you need a third player to come and to join forces and to make this a reality. And as I mentioned, it was not something that was only about Trump administration, because we were working on that for a decade and more. But definitely, we are very happy that the timing was such that we could come all together, sign these agreements that open the door for so much more.
I remember that previous Obama administration, and namely the Secretary of State John Kerry, he nailed down kind of an understanding that without peace with Palestinians, there will be any deals between Israel and any Arab countries.
Exactly. This is the change. This is the new reality, that we can have normalization with another Arab states, and this can be another opportunity to solve the conflict that we have with the Palestinians. We said always, since we started in September 20 with the first agreement, this is a window of opportunity to continue with the efforts toward the peace agreement with the Palestinians. We always said this is just another opportunity.
How is it today, your relationship with the Palestinians? Just recently I heard that the Palestinian representative wanted to get you out of your observation position with the African Union, and so Partner for Peace?
But it didn't help.
It didn't?
Because it didn't succeed. I can tell you that we continue dialogue with them. We have a security cooperation between the Palestinian Authority and Israel, and we have some other channels that are going on. Our ministers are meeting their ministers. So I must say that some kind of cooperation is happening. It's not reported every day, but we have committees and subcommittees, and we try to promote everything that we can promote.
So on the technical level, there is a cooperation,
Definitely.
but political
So
theater
I
is
think that-
a bit different.
I think that everyone understands that eventually, or at least people that understand in the conflict understand that any solution eventually will be a political solution to this conflict. But at the same time, we need to work on the people-to-people relations to make sure that economic ties are being built and better for the people of the Palestinian Authority, and for, we didn't mention, but it's also people of Gaza, and for the Israeli, more security. So this is where we are following now. I mean, we are trying to make sure that economic ties will be strengthened, and at the same time security for Israel.
Very good. And let's now turn into the Amnesty reports, which was published on February 1st.
Sure.
And this pretty massive 280-page report was titled as Israel's Apartheid Against Palestinians, Cruel System of Domination and Crime Against Humanity. What was your first reaction when you read this?
I think I was astonished that such false information and such how would I say, it's really undermining the existence of Israel in many ways. And people actually read it and believe in it. Of course, we rejected it immediately, everything that is written there. And, well, we can discuss it. I mean,
we need to.
You mentioned that 280 pages with less pages, yeah? Last week, The Economist published the Democracy Index from 2021, okay? So let me read you a few things about the Middle East and North Africa part. And it says, the Middle East and North Africa region remains the lowest ranked of all the regions covered in the Democracy Index, with 5 countries of the 20 in the region featuring the bottom 20 in our global ranking. That said, the picture is not uniformly negative across the region, owing to positive trends in Israel, where an Arab party is in government for the first time as a minor player in a wide-ranging coalition. I can tell you that Israel is global ranked 23rd in a democracy index.
Okay.
I think that with much less pages, with some real facts of The Economist, one can understand that the Amnesty reports doesn't mean anything, definitely does not reflect the reality. It's not the reality, it's false, full of lies, and it should be rejected by anyone.
Israel is an apartheid state. That was their strongest arrow in the report, and it's been echoed in every media around the world. Why Israel isn't an apartheid state?
I think, well, as I mentioned, we are a democracy. We prove to be democracy. We have, I think this government is a very special government of Israel because it shows the inclusiveness of our society. We have secular religious ministers, we have Arabs, we have Jews ministers, we have people with disabilities, we have immigrants, we have people with a connection to survivors of the Holocaust. We have everyone in our government. I think not many governments around the world can be so proud of the inclusiveness of their governments, who, by the way, reflects the society. I think one, you didn't mention, but I will mention it, one of the big lies in these reports that shows so-called apartheid states talks about the Palestinians. And it gives a very, it's give the very general picture of the Palestinians in Israel. And this is why they claim Israel is an apartheid state. But the truth is that you cannot relate to the Palestinians in one group, because there are the Arabs who live in Israel. There are the Palestinians who lives under Palestinian Authority rules in the Western, in the West Bank, and there are the Palestinians who lives in Gaza under Hamas rules. So you cannot relate to it as one group, because it's not a one group. And let me tell you a few figures about the Arabs that lives in Israel. Israel now, according to the statistics at the end of 2021, of the December 2020, sorry, Israel is almost 10 million inhabitants. Among them, around 6.8 million Jews and almost 2 million of Arabs. I can tell you that more than millions of Arab citizens can vote. Can vote and can be elected in our election system. You can tell me if this is the description of an apartheid state. I don't know.
So what do you think is the motivation behind not only Amnesty's report, but behind Amnesty International?
I think hatred to Israel, blind hatred to Israel.
Why?
Well, I think it's very easy to say antisemitism. And I will mention here that demonization of Israel that you can see that is reflected in this report, as I mentioned before, undermining the right of Israel to exist as the state of the Jewish nation. This is the modern anti-Semitism, according to our definition and other definitions. But undermining, and this is what this report is doing, the right of the state of Israel to exist. This is very serious.
Actually, I read a report from NGO Monitor that in the embargoed draft sent to journalist Amnesty wrote, "This system of apartheid originated with the creation of Israel in May 1948 and has been built and maintained for decades." But then they, after a criticism on that wording, they deleted and changed the wording. And to me, I was questioning myself, why on earth, after 4 years of writing a report, so they are writing this kind of stuff and then they are deleting it. So they changed it, but still they are blaming that it's been for decades. So what happened when Israel was born? So there was a kind of a platform for a two-state solution at that time.
Yeah, exactly. But then the Arab didn't agree to that and started a war. I mean, at that time, the Jewish settlement in Israel had to compromise and to agree to this UN resolution of dividing Israel to two states. And they agreed. It was with a lot of compromise, but they said, we better have a state for nothing. The Arabs didn't agree to it, to this resolution, and started a war. And this was the 1948 war. And we know how it ended, thanks God. It ended with the establishment of the State of Israel as the state for the Jewish nation. And since then, I can tell you, so I read also in the report another lie, that Israel is trying to minimize the population, oppress the population, etc. So I can tell you that if in December 1948, and in Israel were 108,000 Arabs. Today, as I mentioned, we're talking about more than million. Almost 2 million Arabs that can vote and then can be elected, and we have an Arab parties inside our parliament, and we have an Arab party in our coalition.
Quite an oppression.
Exactly. This is democracy.
Yeah. As a friend of Israel, I was stunned to see when I read the report that every time they were talking about two incidents and naming the birth of Israel, 1948, and also 1967 when there was the so-called Six-Day War. There were no reference to the Arab aggression that they attacked Israel, but it was like only said that since 1967, as Israel has occupied these Palestinian territories. So I found it very poor in the sense of understanding the history and what really happened. And that really bothers me, and for me, it's really hard to understand, or okay, I can understand, but to really see that what's the motivation behind hiding the truth?
It's a really a good question, I must say, because, you know, as we mentioned, what is written there and what do they mention there, we should put also an emphasis on what is not mentioned in this report.
Right.
The Palestinian terrorism is not mentioned.
Yeah.
Is not mentioned. What happened during all these years?
No any aggression.
No aggression whatsoever. The responsibility of the Palestinian Authority and the Hamas, by the way.
Yeah.
Where is it there in this report? Totally ignoring the responsibility of the Palestinian leaders to do something, to change the reality. Totally ignored about the corruption of the Hamas, using money instead of giving it to the society, to the people, using it for terror, for building tunnels, for for putting bombs in all kind of hospitals, in schools. Totally ignore it.
Right.
Only for one reason: demonize Israel, undermine the rights of Israel to exist.
There are many references on the security wall and security checkpoints. Why you need to have them?
Since we have them, we have zero incidents in the checkpoints and towards Israelis. We have to protect ourselves. We have to defend ourselves. We still don't have any borders, unfortunately, unless the political situation will be settled under agreements. So we have to make sure that no terrorists are coming inside Israel and making terror acts from the West Bank and from Gaza.
So what was the situation before the wall?
With many people being killed and threatened, and people came and, with a lot of threats from the West Bank, Now it is totally reduced. I think like much less than fear.
Yeah, and for me, it looks like any government would do the same if they were attacked continuously.
I want, to hope that every government who takes care of its citizens will make sure that people can live safely in their place.
Right.
And this is what Israel was doing since the establishment in 1948, making sure that the Israelis can live under, protection, secure. I think this is very essential. And I must say, Israel can be, and we are very proud of our vibrant and and strong democracy.
I think you have had a number of elections during the past 2 years.
It's true, and it's
Sign
true
of democracy
as well.
as well.
Yeah, but I think it's important to mention that we grant complete social, political equality for every citizen, no matter, regardless of race or religion. I think this is very much important to remember and to stress.
Let me read one excerpt from the report, titled "Intent to Oppress and Dominate Palestinians." Since its establishment in 1948, Israel has pursued an explicit policy of establishing and maintaining a Jewish demographic hegemony and maximizing its control over land to benefit Jewish Israelis while minimizing the number of Palestinians and restricting their rights and obstructing their ability to challenge this dispossession. In 1967, Israel extended this policy beyond the Green Line to the West Bank and Gaza Strip, which it has occupied ever since. Today, all territories controlled by Israel continue to be administered with the purpose of benefiting Jewish Israelis to the detriment of Palestinians, while Palestinian refugees continue to be excluded.
So let's repeat what is the reality. This is what the report said, and let's just make, a pause and let's go to what is the reality. And as I mentioned before, you cannot relate to the Palestinians as a whole. Israel does not have any responsibility to the Palestinians who live in Gaza under Hamas. Israel does not have any responsibility towards the Palestinians who live in the West Bank under the Palestinian Authority. Israel do have full responsibility towards its Arab citizens, which have the right to be elected and to vote for any elections. And the reality is there that we have 2 million Arabs, much more than we had in 48.
And that's why I'm again quoting, while minimizing the number of Palestinians. So from a few hundreds of thousands up to 2 million.
2 million,
That's
of course.
the rate of oppression.
Yeah.
And
But I think also they're talking about oppression, and I will stress it again, that people will hear and will understand. We have an Arab party in our coalition. We have Arab parties in our parliament. They're opposition to the government. They're opposition, to many opinions that we have, but they are being represented in our parliament. I don't know of any Arab state that has such democracy, that they have such an opposition group, partners in coalition or in the parliament.
yeah. And you have Arab judges, IDF officers, and
Yeah, of course.
etc.
In the military service, etc. Yes. We will
Okay.
have national service. Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
There have been a handful of countries that have condemned the Amnesty reports, including the United States, United Kingdom, Germany, Austria, Australia, the Czech Republic. And I've been wondering where is the Finnish outcome of this.
I think that Finland authorities or Finland officials know very well where the truth is. I think they know exactly what this report is reflecting, and even though we might have some differences in how we should deal with the Palestinian-Israel conflict, I think that officials know very well how Israel is conducted and how strong our democracy is. And I really hope it will be reflected also in the Human Rights Council, because Finland entered, as you know, the Human Rights Council. And I think it's really important to hear the voice of Finland in the right places against such reports as Amnesty.
Madam Ambassador, time is running. And we are out of time now.
Oh.
So I want to thank you for your time, for inviting me to your embassy, and thank you for this discussion, and let's see what happens. Hopefully we will see the Amnesty report disappearing and the rights... Fully rejected.
Yeah.
And that's what I also want to have with my government in Finland, that they would say that, no, this is not right.